the first concept that we should get started with is market equilibrium. So what exactly is the market equilibrium? So I will first do a quick review of what we went over last time. So as we said last time, there was a demand and supply curve. So as you can see on the left right here is this is the demand curve, and the curve on the right is the supply curve. So what happens if you put both of these curves on the same graph? Then you get this graph right here on the right. So this right here is the supply and demand curve. It's basically just the supply and the demand curve put together on the same graph. So it looks quite complex, but it's not really complex because it's basically you putting this graph on the left right here onto the same graph as the one that's on the right here. So it's basically you combining these two and putting them together. And this is how you figure out the market equilibrium. So what's the market equilibrium? The market equilibrium is essentially the dot in the middle. It's the intersection point of the supply and the demand curves. So in other words, if you think about it conceptually, it's basically the perfect balance where you're not producing too much that you're wasteful, but you're also producing enough to meet the demand of your customers. And this is the key reason why we want to put supply and demand, these two curves, on the same graph. It's because so that we can figure out what the market equilibrium point is and how much of something that we should supply. So for example, in this case, right here is the quantity, which is the millions of bottles per day. Well, I don't really know bottles of what they're selling, but let's just pretend that there are bottles of juice, for example, let's say. So the bottom here is the quantity of how many bottles of juice they will be selling, right? So on the bottom it's the number of bottles of juice they will be selling, and on the left side, which is uh the y-axis, this would be the price that you're selling it at, right? So it's the price versus the quantity that you're selling it for. As you can see by the label here, it says price. So this is basically a graph illustrating the relationship between the price and the quantity. So when it's sold at $1.50, it's this amount of quantity right here, which is 9. As you can see, it's this quantity. And when you're selling it at $1, it's the market equilibrium point, which is right here. So as you can see, it's all about the relationship between price and quantity, right? But the important thing of why we need to make this graph is so that we can see the market equilibrium point, which is here at the bottom, right? So now time for a tiny demonstration. So we learned all about this market stuff and this management stuff and things about supply and demand, but we haven't really had that much time to practice it. So that's the reason why I included this practice problem for practice. So right here is just a sample problem. I established an ice cream store and collected some data to help with sales management. Unfortunately, a competitor broke into my store and ripped some of my data. Could you please help with filling out the empty spaces? Thank you for saving my store. The answer here should be 8. So, and the reason why you can figure out it's 8 is because if you look at the previous two, there's actually a pattern to it. So for the first one, when the cost was $4, the demand was 2 in terms of, well, I guess this isn't the most accurate way to measure demand in, but just for our hypothetical example or problem here, we measure demand as a number just for this. I don't think in the real world there is any time when demand is actually measured using numbers, but let's just pretend that it's two customers, two people who are willing to buy our product that costs $4, right? And then for the next one, when it's $6, three customers or three people are willing to purchase it. So if we compare this to what we're seeing through the previous object, you can see the pattern that the formula is the cost divided by 2 is equal to the demand. So when the demand is 4, you just do it the other way around and multiply 2, and you therefore get 8. So as you can see, the cost, and it's not only the cost and the demand, the cost and supply, the demand and the supply, these are all directly proportional. Why? Because as I've said in our previous slide, as you can see, the graph, when it's on a graph, then that means that it's proportional. That means that it's directly proportional to the value because you're basically connecting the X and Y values. Now, for the opportunity cost. So here's just another problem, a sample problem for the opportunity cost. So for the opportunity cost, I am making a decision of which ice cream cone I should eat. There's one with a banana flavor, and there's another one with a coconut flavor. What would be the opportunity cost of choosing the banana over the coconut? So the correct answer would be choosing the banana over the coconut. So in this case, if you're choosing the banana over the coconut, then you wouldn't be able to have the coconut, right? So the correct answer would be coconut. So you will be losing the coconut that you could have had. Now, if we go back to some of the earlier slides, to the earlier slide in which I talked about opportunity cost. So as I've said before, opportunity cost is basically the sacrifice that you have to make, the cost of choosing one alternative over another. So what you're losing out by choosing. And as you can see here, even the best choices come at a price. So what this means is that it doesn't matter if you're making a good decision or you're making a bad decision. It's all going to come at a price. You're all giving up something. So you will be giving out something regardless of what you did. So therefore, you would be losing anything regardless of whether or not your decision is actually good. So let's go back to this example in which I talked about the opportunity cost. So in this case, even if you were really happy with your banana over the coconut, you would still be making a sacrifice because you would still be losing out on the coconut. So you would still be losing the coconut as the cost for you choosing the banana. So, and it's not that you doing the coconut, you choosing the banana over the coconut is a bad decision. It's just that if you chose anything in this scenario, you will be losing out on the other thing. And I can't emphasize this enough because you will be losing out on something. It doesn't matter what you choose, you will always be losing out something as long as you're making a decision. Now let's move on to the next slide. So the next new concept that I wanted to present in this class was incentives. So an incentive is basically the benefits or costs of an action that influences people's decision and behavior. So what exactly does that mean? it's basically the result of you performing some kind of action. So it's basically something that tells you to do a certain thing and to behave in a certain way. So an example of this would be, for example, if I saw an umbrella at a store and I bought it because it was raining outside, me wanting to stay dry from the rain would be the incentive. It's basically the reason behind your purchase, because you never purchase something without reason, right? So you purchasing anything would come with a reason. And the way you figure out what the incentive of a behavior is you ask yourself, what is the reason of you buying this stuff? What is the reason of you spending this? And hopefully, if you're good at managing your money, you buy everything responsibly and you buy everything because of a reason, and you don't just buy it because you want it. But technically, you wanting it could serve as an incentive too. But we're mostly talking about stores giving you the incentive. Stores, the sellers of the product, giving you reasons to buy the product. So just as an additional example, besides the umbrella one, if I went into the store and I bought the store's product, and the reason why I bought the store's product was because they had this event where they hired a, well, this is never going to happen, but just for an example, if they hired a celebrity and if you bought the product, then you will be able to meet the celebrity by showing your receipt. So in this case, if someone actually bought the product, then the reason or the incentive for them buying this product would be to meet the celebrity. So see how the seller of the product is providing them with a reason to use the product, to buy the product. And it's actually the store's constant job to provide sellers with incentive, or customers with incentives, to provide customers with the incentives to buy a certain product. And as you can see, all incentives are not the same. It's quite multifaceted. And as you can see here, it's basically meant to influence decisions, and it's the reason why the customers want a certain product. And I'll continuing. So not all incentives are the same. So there are actually two types of incentives. The first one is positive and negative. So what's the difference between a positive incentive and a negative incentive? So a positive incentive is something that's meant to reward. It's something that's meant to reward someone for behaving in a certain way. So for example, an example of this would be coupons. So it's basically if you went into a store to buy something, right? Then you would be wanting to buy that stuff because they will be giving you coupons. I'm not sure, actually, I'm pretty sure that all of you have seen this in action before. So an example would be if I walked into the store and the sellers of the product told me that if I bought a certain product, they would present me with coupons. And if I actually bought the product, then my incentive behind buying that product would be a positive incentive. In other words, I'm being rewarded for buying this product. The sellers are rewarding me with a coupon for purchasing this product. And now, let's take the negative of that. Let's take the exact opposite of that. If you can reward someone for performing in a certain way, you can also punish someone for performing in a certain way. So an example of this would be tickets. And I know this is economics and it's about sellers, but actually this idea of incentives isn't necessarily limited to just sellers and businessmen and women, because it could also be used whenever you want someone to do something. So an example of this would be the government, or more specifically, the police officers. So how do they stop you from parking illegally and stop you from parking on the street wherever you want? the way that they stop you from doing that is by giving you a negative incentive. So what's the negative incentive? The negative incentive here are the tickets, the fine that you will receive if you parked illegally. So this is meant to punish you. An example of another negative incentive, and I hope that none of you actually run into this incentive, is jail time. So for example, if you commit a crime, then you would have to go to jail, right? So that's trying to discourage you from doing the crime, from committing the crime. So as you can see, that's another negative incentive that's meant to punish. So the government wants to stop you, wants to prevent you from committing this crime. So they tell you what's going to happen if you committed this crime. So, and here are just a few examples of problems that you could see regarding positive and negative incentives. So please determine if each of these are positive or negative. So starting with the first one, my mom told me if I got an A+ on the next test, I'd get a free ice cream. So would this be a positive or a negative incentive? This actually isn't a realistic situation because for some cases, I don't think any seller or any kind of business person will be so generous to give out free ice cream, especially due to a shop that sells ice cream. I don't think they'd be giving out free ice cream. So I'm sorry, but this isn't an actual example. But most of the responses that we've seen are correct. It is a positive incentive because it's a reward. You're being rewarded to give something, even though this would never happen. But still, in our theoretic world, this is positive because you're being rewarded. What about the next one? And the next one should be fairly easy because I actually gave a similar example of this during my presentation earlier. Okay, so here's the answer. The answer would be negative because you're being punished for something. You're being threatened with a punishment. And let's hope that no one receives this punishment again. But you're being punished if you robbed a bank. You're being punished by the arrest. You do not want to be arrested. So that's a negative incentive of what you don't want to happen to you. And now let's go on to the final example. In a game, if I win, I'm awarded with a vast amount of money. If I lose, my money gets taken away. Is this a negative or is this a positive incentive? So it was actually a trick question. This is actually both, because depending on the way that you behave, you could be faced with both kinds of behaviors. So if you look at the earlier examples, right? For the first one, if I got an 8+ on the next test, I get a free ice cream. Well, this is clearly positive because it's talking about what would happen if I behaved in some way. And the thing that would happen was positive, was something that I would want. And for the second one, it's the opposite. But for this one, it's not really that clear because it contains both a positive part and also a negative part. Therefore, it's both. And I've seen that someone said that it's actually negative because you probably pay for tickets to play the game. Well, that's actually not wrong. If you eliminate it within the ideas of positive and negative incentive, then it would be both. But if you looked at it from an economics perspective, then that's actually not bad of an answer at all, because you have an opportunity cost. You have to pay to enter the game. So you will be losing money anyways. So therefore it's more skewed towards the negative by default, because even if you want money, you would still be just paying for the ticket price. But anyways, back to the topic. So if you've noticed, then most of the examples, well, not most, but some of the examples that I've given had to do with the government and police officers. And bureaucrats, right? But this is mainly, at least with the objectives of this course, concerned with business, because it's used in business actually a lot. And I will guarantee that you've seen this, you've seen businesses offering incentives before. It's just that you didn't know what the proper word was. So one thing you have to be aware of if you want to use incentives for doing business is that all businesses give positive incentives. Businesses cannot give negative incentives because businesses cannot force you to do anything, right? For example, if you rob a bank, the police officer can force you to go to jail. But if you don't buy a certain product, then the business can't force you to do anything because that would be really, really illegal, right? So all business incentives are positive. At least most, not most, but every single one that I've seen was positive. And I'd actually challenge you to give me a business that presents negative incentives. So as you can see in these two commercials and whatever you call these things, it all contains a positive incentive. So for the first one, it says buy one pizza at regular menu price and get one free of equal or lesser value. So this one right here is a positive incentive because they're giving you an incentive to buy the pizza. So what's the incentive? The incentive here is that if you bought one pizza, you will receive one free pizza, which hopefully everyone goes to the store and buys a lot of pizza, and it balances out the amount of pizza that they have to give out for free. But they're presenting you with an incentive. But after Disney saw this commercial, Disney wasn't happy, and Disney released their own commercial, which says buy one, get one free. I don't even know what they're selling in this commercial, but it seems to be some kind of CD plate. But again, they're using the same tactic, which is regardless of what product they're selling, they're telling you that if you bought one of their product, you would get another one of their product free. In other words, they're using the same positive incentive of you wanting to buy the product because you wanting to save money and you wanting to receive a product for free. So now it's time for a new chapter of our course, which is economics systems. So most of the things that we've learned previously within this course has been on the relative small level. It has all been relatively small and limited to regular small business owners, the type of businesses that you see on the street, right? But now as our course progresses, it's ready for some more heavier things and bigger things. So this is the reason why we will jump into economic systems. So you may be asking, what exactly is an economic system? An economic system is basically a government's way of managing the economy and how the economy functions within a country. And this is important because it impacts all the small businesses. Sure, some of the things that I've talked about, like opportunity cost and factors of production, are extremely important for you to be able to operate a company. But in the face of economic systems, all of those are completely irrelevant and insignificant because these economic systems, they're not only monitoring your company specifically, they're monitoring every single business that operates, and they're affecting and they're regulating the way that your business can be run. So, and yes, even in free countries, no matter how free a country is, there's still a general set of guidelines that their economy has to operate by. So it's not like you can just operate your company whatever way you want. There's still a regulation of how companies interact with each other. And we can see this right here. It's actually a spectrum. There's no precise point or precise vocabulary for how, let's say, the United States operates its economy. It's all a spectrum. So on one side of the spectrum, we have a market economy. So what exactly is a market economy? So what exactly is a market economy? A market economy is an economy like the United States, well, the United States is relatively market economy. So here's another word. I know this word is complicated. Another word for market economy is capitalism, and I would just write cap for short. So capitalism. I'm pretty sure you have all heard of this word before. So these two words are exactly the same. They all mean the same thing. So what exactly does capitalism mean? Capitalism means that all businesses in the country are owned by private sectors. Okay, so what's a private sector? A private sector is basically a private citizen like you and me. Or another way to put it, it's any person or any organization besides the government. And this is going to make more sense when we get into the thing that's on the other end of the spectrum, communism. And the second thing is you have the freedom to start business. So here in the US, if you wanted to start a business, and I would actually encourage you to start a business right now. But if you want to just start a business, you could go outside and just set up your own business. And there's no one to stop you. If you do everything legally, if you don't cheat, if you don't cheat people out of money, then the government won't interfere. So that's the freedom to start a business. So you have the right in the United States to start your own private company, right? And I know it may feel like common sense, but this actually isn't the case in all economic systems. So you can own the company 100%, and you can start your company and you can decide what to do with it. And the last one actually goes hand in hand with the previous one. It's supply and demand. So do you remember we previously talked about supply and demand and how that's pretty much sets the price and everything is related? It's the topic that I'm so excited about and I keep rambling on about. In a market economy, supply and demand exists and they determine the price. Well, I shouldn't say exists because it exists everywhere, but they determine the price. So in a market economy, how much you decide to sell a product for depends on the amount of people who are willing to buy the product and all the stuff that we learn about. Those things such as supply and demand, they set the supply and they also set the price at which you sell your products. Now let's move on to the opposite end of the spectrum in which we reverse everything. Everything goes in the opposite way, and that is a market economy. So this is also kind of hard to understand. So I'm going to replace it with another simple word because economy is like complex words that make no sense. Okay, you've probably heard of this before. It's called communism. So again, just as capitalism is the same as market economy, communism is the same as command economy. Or some people say socialism, but there are actually some differences between socialism and communism, but it's all in this general same category. They're all called command economy, right? But I won't get into specifics of what the difference is. But for now, you just have to understand that these two are all command economies. So what exactly makes a communist country a communist economy? You hear people say all the time, that country is communist, this government is communist. But what exactly does that mean? So what that means is businesses are all owned by the government. So that means that you as an individual, you basically cannot be the CEO of a company. That's not a valid position. So in other words, you cannot be the boss of any company. You have to be the employee, no matter how high your position is. Well, who are you the employee of? You're the employee of the company that's owned by the government. So think about it. Every single company is owned by the government, and the government has control of all the companies. And now let's go on to the next one. There's a lot of government regulation, right? So because they're in control of the company, then they're able to regulate what the company does, and they're able to decide what the company should do and should not do, and they're able to decide everything for the company. And this include products. So I'll just write products. So this depends. So they're able to determine what kind of products the company sells. So they're able to choose to sell a product because the company is theirs. So of course they're able to decide. So an example of this is actually one of the most iconic examples would be the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was a communist country. So what exactly does this mean? It means that in the Soviet Union, all companies had to listen to the government. So let's say, well, I don't really know any good car companies in the Soviet Union, but let's say if I worked for a company that produced cars. If I were in the Soviet Union at that time, then first of all, the government would determine that my company was selling cars. I can't just decide to switch my company to another in the industry. The government decided that. And also, the boss, the person who sat in the CEO office, was someone appointed by the government. So I'm just an employee working for the government, basically. So that means all employees are government workers. So in an economy like this, employees are the same as government workers. Technically, they're the same as government workers. They're not bureaucrats, but they all work for the government, technically. And one last factor that goes directly as the opposite as this is, instead of letting the prices go naturally being set by demand, there is a lot of price control. So what is price control? Let's go back to my example of my car factory. Why the car factory that I don't own, but I work at, right? How much I sell the car for in the US. If we were in the US, the price at which I sell the car would be determined by the demand, but and the supply and all that stuff that I explained before that I don't want to go into again because it's complex. But if I were in the Soviet Union, then my company does not get to decide how much the cars cost. The person who's sitting in that office representing the government, and the government decide how much my car should be sold for. The government decide what price I should sell my car for. But the next one is there's actually a huge misconception in terms of economic systems. There is no pure follower of either ideology, which means that if you hear people say, that country is communist, that country is socialist, they're actually making a mistake because no countries are communist or socialist. There isn't a single country that's 100% communist, and there isn't a single country that's 100% capitalist. Meaning there isn't a single country that follows the exact principles of capitalism 100% for every single industry, and there also isn't a single country that follows communism in its every single doctrine. There are only countries that are relatively communist and relatively capitalist. So as you can see here, it's a spectrum. So it all depends on where you're located on this spectrum. And in the middle are mixed economies. So these are economies that use a combination of both. So here is just what I just described. There isn't a single country that's capitalist or a single country that's communist. So I will just provide a few examples. So an example will be Norway. So Norway is a capitalist country. There people are able to start their businesses and they're able to become CEOs. However, they are also somewhat communist because Norway provides free healthcare for all citizens. I don't really know like the specific terms of the healthcare, but there is a public healthcare system. But guess what? This healthcare company is owned by the government. The company that provides healthcare for all its citizens, it's technically a company, right? Because it's providing healthcare. It's providing health insurance. It's just a regular insurance company. But this company is owned by the government. So as you can see, there is at least one company that's owned by the government in the country of Norway, the Kingdom of Norway, right? And let's take this to the opposite side. Vietnam. Vietnam officially claims to be socialist. It's in their constitution. They claim to be a communist country, a socialist country with a controlled economy. But in recent years, they've been looking for foreign direct investment, or FDI, right? So as you can see, there are private companies. So neither of these countries are communist or socialist or capitalist or command economy. So as you can see, it's not pure. It's always 75% capitalist mixed in with 25% socialist. In the case of Norway, because there's that one company. There are probably more, but there's that, at least there's one company that's owned by the government. Now let's go on to an example. This is actually a really good example. Is actually China. So China is actually a really good example of there not being any absolutes in this world. So China is a communist country, or at least they claim to be a communist country. So as you can see, these are actually the 5 communist countries that are still communist today, or at least they all claim to be communist. But now let's look at the figure on the right. 76% of Chinese believe that most people are better off in a free market economy. And this actually is the direction that the country is following right now. They are currently looking for investment with private companies. So as you can see, even though China claims to be socialist and they do have a lot of socialist programs headed by their government, they're still heading in a capitalist direction. So looking back at our spectrum, China will probably be somewhere here in the middle where it says mixed economic system, where they have a good mix of both market economy and also command economy. They have a good mix of private business owners, and they also have the government stepping in some cases to regulate companies. So as you can see, the point that I'm trying to make here is that there isn't a single country that's 100% communist, and there isn't a single country that's 100% socialist. It's all depending on where on the spectrum you are, whether you're 60% communist or you're 60% socialist. And I think we can end on that note because that's about time.